John Wayne Gacy's early life began in a modest Chicago home in 1942, where the foundations of his personality were shaped long before anyone knew his name. He grew up in a working-class family, the middle child with two sisters, in an environment that mixed routine American life with simmering emotional tension. His father, a World War I veteran and machinist, carried the hardness of a man who believed discipline was the only path to strength. His mother was the opposite, gentle, protective, and always trying to soften the blows that came from the other side of the room. From the moment he could talk, Gacy seemed to search for acceptance. He wanted approval, especially from his father, but rarely got it. Small accomplishments were shrugged off. Mistakes were magnified. He was criticized for being soft, for crying easily, or for staying close to his mother. His father often saw vulnerability where there was only childhood, and he didn't hide his disappointment. The contrast between a father demanding toughness and a son craving warmth shaped a quiet storm inside the boy. Health problems added another layer. Gacy was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition that caused him to faint unexpectedly. His body couldn't handle strenuous activity, and this placed him further apart from other boys his age. While they ran and played, he stayed inside or moved carefully, hoping to avoid another episode. Instead of sympathy, he was accused of exaggerating or pretending to gain attention. Even when medical tests confirmed the issue, the distrust lingered. These limitations isolated him. School became a struggle not because of academics, but because he often wasn't there. Frequent hospital visits, periods of weakness, and days spent recovering meant he missed lessons and social connections. Children can be unforgiving, and Gacy often felt like an outsider looking in, watching friendships form around him, but rarely being part of them. Around age 7, he suffered a significant blow to the head from a playground incident that left him with a blood clot. For years it went untreated and contributed to his fainting spells and health problems. It wasn't corrected until he was older, and even then the damage to his confidence had already taken root. The combination of illness, ridicule, and emotional neglect shaped the way he viewed himself. Someone on the edge of acceptance but never fully inside it. He found escape in helping his mother around the house, cooking, cleaning, or running errands. In a different situation, those might have been simple family chores, but in his home they became fuel for further criticism. His father saw them as signs of weakness rather than willingness, reinforcing the idea that Gacy wasn't living up to his expectations of manhood. This deepened the divide between them and strengthened the boy's reliance on his mother's approval. Despite these struggles, Gacy showed signs of wanting to be noticed in positive ways. He joined school activities when he could, tried to make friends, and looked for spaces where he felt useful. Teachers often remembered him as polite, eager to please, and willing to work when his health allowed it. But underneath that effort was a child learning early that praise was rare, affection was conditional, and acceptance had to be earned rather than given freely. Adolescence didn't ease the pressure. His relationship with his father remained tense, sometimes silent, sometimes explosive, always unpredictable. Gacy tried part-time jobs, joined social groups, and attempted to build a sense of identity outside his home, but the unresolved feelings from childhood, fear of rejection, yearning for approval, and resentment of constant criticism, followed him closely. By the time he reached his late teens, the pattern was set. A boy who smiled publicly while feeling small privately, someone who craved validation but didn't know how to get it in healthy ways, and someone who learned to hide parts of himself to avoid judgment. Those early lessons in secrecy, identity, and the need to project an image would later become central to the adult he became. When Gacy eventually stepped into adulthood, he carried the echoes of his early home with him. The insecurity, the desire to be liked, the resentment toward those who dismissed him, and the double life he learned to perform as a child were all ingredients waiting for a spark. His early life didn't explain everything, but it formed the emotional blueprint, the place where masks were learned long before they were ever worn in public. When Gacy left home as a young adult, He spent a short period working at a city mortuary. It was late-night work in a quiet building, surrounded by silence and responsibility. For someone already struggling with loneliness and internal conflict, the environment had a lasting effect. He left suddenly after a few months, but the experience stayed with him and seemed to influence the path his life gradually followed. Back in Chicago, he tried to build something stable. He married, moved to Iowa, and earned a management position at a family restaurant. On the surface, he looked like a man getting his life together, eager to be helpful, ambitious, and respected. He joined a local community group, putting on the same charm he used throughout his early life. But privately, he began crossing boundaries with younger individuals connected to the group. He offered them attention, gifts, and access to things they wouldn't normally have, slowly testing how much control he could exert. Eventually, one of these situations reached a point where the truth had to be confronted. A complaint was made, and despite Gacy denying everything, investigators found enough evidence to take the matter seriously. He was convicted and sent to prison. Prison should have been a turning point, but Gacy quickly learned how to adapt. He became the model inmate, volunteering for jobs, helping with improvements to the kitchen, and behaving exactly how staff wanted an inmate to behave. He gained the trust of officers and administrators, shaping himself into someone who looked cooperative and reformed. His performance earned him early release long before his original sentence was expected to end. When he returned to Chicago, he moved back in with his mother and began building a small construction business. This job gave him access to young men looking for quick work or a place to belong. To them, he appeared generous, offering meals, lifts, and wages. But behind closed doors, Gacy used these opportunities to test people's trust and vulnerability. He often introduced a trick involving a pair of handy cuffs, demonstrating how he could lock himself in and easily escape. Once he convinced someone else to try the same demonstration, the tone of the situation shifted. By the time they realized there was no simple way out, Gacy had assumed complete control. What followed had a pattern he refined over the years. Individuals who entered his home expecting payment or hospitality found themselves in situations they could not back out of. Some were overpowered through manipulation, fear, or the sudden change in his behavior. Many didn't survive these encounters. Over time, he developed a method that relied on a loop of cord tightened with a short piece of wood, something he chillingly referred to as a trick. Once a person lost consciousness, Gacy acted with cold certainty. To hide what he had done, he used the crawl space beneath his home, a low, cramped area supported by wooden beams. He treated it like a private storage ground, returning repeatedly when another disappearance needed to be covered. When the space became too crowded, he quietly found other ways to move remains, including transporting some to local waterways. All the while, he maintained his public persona. He became active in local politics, attended meetings, hosted gatherings, and even performed as a clown at community events. Neighbors saw a friendly man who helped organize block parties and supported charities. They had no idea that many of the young men who passed through his home never left. As the years passed, the pattern only grew bolder.
Hey there, need a lift?
Oh, hi. Yeah, maybe. Where to?
Into town. I'm heading that way.
Okay, thanks.
Gacy no longer relied solely on the casual interaction of giving someone work or offering a lift home. He began actively seeking out people who were isolated, struggling, or simply passing through the city. He knew how to present himself as helpful and trustworthy, and he used that image to draw people into situations they could not easily escape. Some were promised quick cash for a day's labor, others were offered a warm meal or temporary shelter. The invitations sounded ordinary, but once inside his home, the balance of power shifted sharply in his favor. Police across the region were aware that young men were disappearing, but each case seemed disconnected. Some were travelers, some had unstable family lives, some had moved between cities. Without a clear thread tying them together, the disappearances looked like isolated tragedies rather than part of a larger pattern. Gacy counted on this confusion. He kept an organized schedule, maintained his business, and remained fully involved in local community work, which made him appear reliable to anyone who might have questioned him. His double life depended on blending in, and he had become extremely skilled at doing just that. Inside his home, the situation changed instantly. When someone realized they had put themselves in danger, it was usually too late. Gacy relied on surprise, intimidation, and the confidence he had spent years building. His method became so routine that it hardly changed from one encounter to the next. He used the same trick again and again, tightening control until the person lost consciousness. Afterwards, he returned to the crawl space, treating it like part of a grim routine. The area became increasingly crowded and difficult to manage, yet he kept using it, convinced he could continue without being caught. By the late 1970s, however, cracks began to appear in the image he presented to the world. People close to the missing individual started pushing harder for answers. Certain details surfaced: sightings, last known addresses, names mentioned in passing. And a pattern finally began to form. Gacy still behaved as though nothing was wrong. He hosted gatherings, joined community events, and offered help to neighbors. His confidence had grown to the point where he believed he could talk his way out of anything. What changed everything was a single disappearance that could not be dismissed. Investigators took it seriously from the beginning, interviewing witnesses, tracing movements, and following every lead. For the first time, the trail pointed directly at Gacy's house. When officers visited him for questioning, they noticed inconsistencies in his story. His behavior shifted from friendly cooperation to irritation whenever they pushed for details he couldn't control. Police kept returning, each time gathering more evidence, each visit tightening the circle around him. As suspicion grew, officers eventually obtained a warrant to search the property. They expected to find something linked to the missing individual, maybe clothing, paperwork, or signs of an encounter. What they discovered was far worse. The first sign came from beneath the house, the unmistakable smell rising from the crawl space. It was so strong that the officers immediately realized this was no isolated disappearance. The discovery triggered a full excavation, revealing the scale of what had been hidden beneath the floorboards. The truth unraveled quickly after that. Gacy's public persona collapsed, replaced by the reality of what he had been doing for years. Investigators uncovered the remains of numerous individuals in the crawl space, each connected to the pattern he had created. When confronted with the evidence, he alternated between denial, minimizing, and long, rambling explanations. But none of it could disguise what had happened. The facade he had built around himself for so long finally fell apart, revealing the magnitude of his crimes and the years of deception that had kept him hidden in plain sight. When the case finally reached court, the evidence was overwhelming. Investigators had traced missing men to his home, recovered items linking him to disappearances, and uncovered the grim details hidden beneath the house. In the courtroom, the man who once blended into community events and local politics was forced to face the full weight of what had been uncovered. During the trial, he tried to present himself as someone misunderstood, someone who had been pushed by circumstances. He shifted between confidence, denial, and dramatic outbursts, hoping to sway the jury. But the testimony of experts, investigators, and survivors painted a much clearer picture. The prosecution laid out a pattern of manipulation, control, and deliberate planning. It wasn't chaos, it wasn't confusion. It was a sustained campaign built on taking advantage of vulnerable people who crossed his path. The defense attempted to argue diminished responsibility, suggesting that he had been influenced by childhood trauma and periods of personal instability. But the jury saw the consistency in his actions, the repeated methods, the calculated decisions, the attempts to hide what he had done. After weeks of evidence, the verdict was decisive. He was found guilty on multiple counts, each tied to an individual life that had been taken from the community. Sentencing reflected the scale of the crimes. The judge emphasized the level of planning involved and the years of concealment. There was no chance of returning to normal life, no possibility of blending in again. He was sent to a high-security facility to begin serving his time, a place far removed from the neighborhood gatherings and civic clubs where he once presented himself as helpful and harmless. Prison removed all the masks he had used for so long. Here, there were no community members to charm, no young men to lure with promises of work, and no political events where he could pose as a respectable citizen. Yet even inside the system, he tried to shape how others saw him. He gave interviews, wrote letters, and attempted to portray himself as a victim of misunderstanding. Guards and inmates alike described him as someone who constantly sought attention, a man who could not accept being forgotten. After his conviction, Gacy spent 14 years on death row. During that time, he filed appeals, gave interviews, painted, and continued insisting he was innocent, even as the evidence against him was overwhelming. His execution was carried out at Stateville Correctional Center. On May 10, 1994, at the age of 52, John Wayne Gacy was put to death by lethal injection. For many, his death marked the end of one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. For the families affected, it brought a measure of closure, though nothing could ever undo the pain he caused. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe.